the latest in our series of Upshot Community Webinars. It's really great to see in the chat all people all over UK sharing the fact that it looks like a beautiful day out there today. Thank you so much for sparing the time to join us. And as we go through, if you do have any questions, please jot them down in the chat, and we will be very happy to either to follow up if we have a chance during the call, or follow up with you afterwards. So we've all been on some chats and Zoom calls where people are fighting to be heard and things like that. So we found that this is the best way to manage it. So I hope that's okay. We are recording this session today, so it will be available afterwards on our website. Obviously, so if colleagues want to listen in or you want to share with anybody, that's fine. Yeah, so we will be keeping you on mute, as it were, so put any questions you have in the chat. Today we will be looking at participant journeys with Upshot's timeline feature, timeline events feature, and my colleague Jason Mikowski will be going through the different features and around timeline events. We'll be looking at an introduction, what it is and where you can find it, and then also how to add timeline events and also to manage them. And then finally, we'll be looking at reporting, so 3 sections for you today. As I say, if we don't get chance, there is a lot to cover because there's some exciting recent developments in this area. If we don't get chance to answer your questions, apologies, but we will follow up with you afterwards. Just to make a really important point here, these are, we're demonstrating some ideas for you here today. Please, please, please do check with your team, your manager, or your funder to make sure that what you're doing within Upshot meets their criteria. Every organisation is different. We've got people on the call here from boxing academies, from local authorities, from community organisations, a wide range of organisations, and that's what makes Upshot's community so interesting. But obviously everybody has different needs, so please do check that before implementing anything that we're showing you today. And just also to reiterate that Upshot support is operational as usual, as many of you know. We're providing training online, and we're also providing support as normal. So please feel free to get in touch. So we're just gonna, hopefully you can see the screen okay, and you can hear me all right. Somebody will put in the chat if you can't hear, just do let me know. So just to reiterate that your support is always available by email or telephone, and you'll see that at the top of your Upshot page that we're looking at here. And then we've also got lots of guides, etc., that you can go dip into too on all the aspects of Upshot. Also wanted to point out our What's New feature. So any recent developments will be flagged here, and we've recently done quite a few, and there's still some coming down the line as well. So please keep an eye on that one. So without further ado, I think I can introduce my colleague, that's Jason Mikowski, who will guide us through the timeline events feature.
Hello, good morning everyone. Hopefully you can hear me all right as well. Yes, my name is Jason. I've been with the Upshot team for about 1.5 years now, in a similar role to Lynn. So we both work kind of on the business development side, mostly working with new clients, onboarding them onto the system. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. And I'll be taking you through our timeline and timeline events feature this morning. When we did the run through yesterday, we did go slightly over time. There is quite a bit to fit into this feature. So we will try and keep it to about 20 to 30 minutes, hopefully finish around 11 o'clock. We will try and make a time for questions as well. Do feel free to pop your questions into the chat, as Lynn said, and she will try and respond to them as we go along as well. Okay, great. So some of you may be using the timeline event feature already, and some of you may be new to this area. So I'm quickly just going to introduce what timelines are and how you can then actually add events to participant timelines. So most of you will already be recording personal information, contact details, demographic data about your participants directly onto their profiles when you add them into the system. And then usually the second step for organizations is to capture participation. So to go into your projects and add sessions and registers and log those participants as attendees on those activities and events. But for many funders these days, that's just not enough in terms of being able to capture not just that quantitative data. They also want to see from you, well, so what? What impact has that engagement, have those services had on your participants' lives? And that's where a few additional features in Upshot can come in really handy in terms of capturing that change over time, capturing those individual outcomes. You may find the survey feature really useful to actually ask your participants questions, and we will be covering that in a later webinar in our series as well. But today we're going to be focusing on the timeline and how that feature can be used to report back to funders on those individual outcomes, to make notes about conversations that you've had with your participants, or just to record milestones about things that have happened in their lives. Okay, so the attendee timeline does sit on the participants' profiles. So today I'm going to use Anna as our example. So I'm just going to type her name in here in our search bar on the top right, and then go straight onto her profile. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with this view. So you may have noticed at the top there's these three tabs: the personal details, the timeline, and the session report. And today we'll just click into the timeline. Now the timeline is basically where you can have a chronological record of those different milestones or individual outcomes or notes that you've recorded against this individual. And as the name implies, basically starts at the bottom with the oldest record, and then you can kind of move up the screen to read those different, we call them timeline events. So I'm just going to show you here briefly what we've captured about Anna's journey so far. So she was actually referred to us onto our service back in towards the end of 2019. And so this is just to show that, you know, you can really go back far, and it doesn't matter when you first got onto Upshot, when your system first started, when your account first started with us, you can go back and record older data as well to really capture that journey over time, or the engagement that you've had with that individual. So we can see here she was referred to us from the local council. And we made a note here that she was actually brought in through the job centre that's run by the council locally. And what we did is we then actually associated this timeline event with one of our projects, which is the education and employment project on this demo account. And what this allows us to do is then to report back later against that project in particular, how many of these events have been recorded. And what we clearly did when we first took on this person from the council was to engage with her through that particular service area. So as I scroll up on my screen, I can see other milestones that we recorded. We've recorded a change in her accommodation status here, so where she is or how she's living. So now she's renting through the local authority as well. We've recorded an accreditation or qualification that she's gained with us. This is a fantastic place to store these types of notes against qualifications or things that people have achieved. And the list of accreditations that you may deliver or that you may give out to participants, of course, will vary from organization to organization. We will have a closer look at exactly how this accreditation piece works in a second. You may also notice on your timeline, some of my timeline events have this closed eye icon, or will have an open eye. And basically what that denotes is that you can actually restrict access to a particular timeline event to particular users. And again, this is something I'll show in a second when we add a timeline event, how you do that. But essentially what that means is that I don't have full access to this timeline event, so I can only see the title of that and when it was added to this person's timeline. But I can't see any additional notes or associations regarding that. So if this is something that's, you know, a more sensitive piece of information, you can then clearly identify who should be able to access this. Any media files or survey responses will also be posted onto their timeline if you associate them directly with that person. So this media file is a picture from a workshop that Anna attended, and I've associated that media file when I uploaded it directly to that participant, and that's why it sits here as per, you know, when it was uploaded onto the system. And then, as I said, any survey responses as well. So this is a Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale baseline survey that she completed, and I can actually then click in and view her survey results straight from the timeline as well. Okay. At the top, we can actually filter our list of timeline events over time. So as these participants take part in your services and, you know, you may engage with them over many years, obviously this timeline will fill up and may become quite busy. So if you're looking at looking for a particular note or particular milestones this person may have achieved, you can use this drop-down filter to search by particular events. So these are from our drop-down menu of timeline events on this particular account. So I could say, show me all of the accreditations that this person's gained, for example, and then it just filters down to that. Or I can filter down to my media files and survey responses on our account as well. Okay, so that's the timeline, and that's kind of how it works. So let's look at how you can actually add a timeline event. So when you first go onto this page, this is actually the first question that you're asked. What has happened or changed with Anna West? And that's what we're denoting here. And what you'll do is you'll be able to choose from a drop-down menu of customizable timeline events. So some of these are default options that just come with the Upshot account when we first set it up for you. And those will include things like accommodation status or accreditation, things like BMI measurement, for particularly important for lots of our sports organizations that we work with. But then there are additional timeline events that you can add yourselves that we call custom timeline events. For instance, recently, in recent webinars, we've been talking about COVID-19 response. So these are some of the custom fields we added into this account. And I'll show you in a second how you can actually add one of those if you haven't got these already. So as an example, if we want to make a change here, so Anna's been participating in our education and employment workshops. She's been engaging in our service to help her with her employment opportunities. And so now we want to record a milestone that she's achieved. She's had a change in her employment, education, and training status. So this is the menu that pops up. And the first thing, so different timeline events you can configure to work in different ways. So sometimes they will just be a yes or no response. So has this person hasn't changed in this area, yes or no? In this case, we've actually created a drop-down menu of options. So what kind of change has this person experienced in this area? So we can see here in terms of education, employment or training, there's a few different options. And what we want to say is that she's now actually gained employment as a result of taking part in our services. She told us about this a couple of days ago. So actually she started her job on Tuesday. And in the notes section, you can now add additional detail. And this can be super long. So this can be a full assessment if that's what you're using this tool for. After a session, if you're making detailed notes about what was discussed, for instance, you can include that here. You can use these different formatting tools. A colleague of mine once copied and pasted a whole Guardian article in here. So this really can be as long as you need it to be. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to type in a little bit of detail. So Anna got a job at local Tesco. Seems to be one of the only industries hiring at the moment. Okay. And now I can actually associate this with one of the projects that she's taken part in. So as we know, Anna's been engaging in our education and employment project. And so I want to add this timeline event against that. So when I'm doing my reporting later on, and I want to show funders what individual outcomes have participants achieved by taking part in this particular project, I can make that link. And I can even select the particular activity that she's taken part in. So if, for instance, she took part in, let's say, a CV writing workshop, and then she sent off her CV to Tesco, and as a result of that, she got the job, then we may want to associate this timeline event with that activity. So we can see here on the drop-down menu, the different activities that are associated with this project. So I'm actually going to select the CV writing one here. And finally, we will want to link this individual achievement to one of or multiple of our organizational outcomes. So within Upshot, you may know that whenever you're adding a new activity or you're setting up an indicator, you're already associating those services with your organizational outcomes. So those big strategic things that you want to achieve as on a program or as an entire organization. We've got some examples here. These are related to the DCMS outcomes. So for instance, we're working towards economic development in our area. And of course, someone gaining employment does help contribute to this organizational outcome. So I can now make that link between this personal change in someone's life to one of our organizational outcomes. And that will really help us with our reporting. And then finally, as I mentioned, if this was something that I didn't want everyone on my system, all of my users to be able to access, if this was some sensitive information that Anna's told me in confidence and she only wants certain people to know, the people who are directly working with her, for instance, I can select from the drop-down menu all of our different users who have access to this profile and would therefore be able to see it usually. So if I don't select anything here, you can just leave this blank and then click save. It basically means that everyone who goes into Anna's profile will be able to see that note. But if I do want to limit it, I can select myself and then maybe one of my colleagues on the education and employment program, Sarah, and only the two of us will now be able to see that full note. So I can just click save here. And you can see now the difference. So this timeline event, I don't have access to. So this has been restricted to other users in the system. And therefore, I've got the closed eye. And I can only see that timeline event title. And this one is restricted, but I'm one of the people that has access. So therefore, there's the open eye. And I can see all the notes associated with that timeline event. Great. So that's how you add a timeline event directly from a person's profile. But there's actually another way to add timeline events, especially when you're working with multiple people at the same time and they've all achieved the same outcome or the same event or milestone. And that is directly from a session register. So if I go into my education and employment project here and then have a look at my activities. So here's some of our activities that we've delivered in this area. And most of you will hopefully be familiar with the sessions list here where we can see all the different sessions of those different activities that have happened. And I can see here some of my workshops, employment workshops, and we delivered one on the 1st of April. And I can click into the register here. And this one's already been submitted. So we've already told the system who attended. And here's our list of attendees. We can see Anna was actually one of those participants. So once you submit that, so once you tell the system, these are the people who attended this activity, one of the buttons that will pop at the top is timeline event. What I can now do is I can click on this and actually add a timeline event to multiple participants' profiles at the same time. So here's our menu of timeline events that we're already familiar with. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, as a result of this workshop, all of these people, or some of these people who attended it, have now gained an accreditation. They've gained a qualification with us. And again, I have a drop-down menu. Here's lots of examples that organizations have previously used. I'm going to say, actually, people here gained a first aid in the workplace qualification by attending this workshop. Now, the system knows, because I'm adding this from this particular session, the date of that event. So it's already pre-populated that for me. And if this is a qualification that may expire or may need renewing in the future, I can put in a date of that renewal. So I can say this expires in previous time. Again, I can add additional information. So maybe some of the particular areas we covered in this particular workshop, things we need to know about accreditation. Again, the system has already pre-populated some of these fields. It knows this activity to partner education employment project. It knows the exact activity that this resulted from, but I may want to add some of our outcomes as well. Again, I'm going to link that to economic development. And now I can say, well, all of these people who attended this workshop came away with that qualification. So I can just select that button at the top, or I could just select particular people. That may have been a test at the end and some people didn't pass that test. So I can selectively go through and highlight some of these people. So of course, our friend Anna gained that qualification as well. Okay. So now just to double check, if I go back onto Anna's profile and check her timeline, I'll be able to see that event added to her profile. Now, I did actually do this before, so now she's got it twice. So if I have made a mistake, or actually I need to edit that, you can always go back in and click on that edit button, or I can just delete that timeline event from her profile as well. Great, fantastic. So now we've covered where the timeline is, how we can add timeline events directly from the timeline itself or through a session register. So the next bit I want to cover is how you can actually now add some custom timeline events to your profile, and how you can choose to manage which custom fields are showing up in your drop-down menu. So this is particularly relevant for system administrators. So if you're a system administrator in your organization and you have that access on your profile, on your account, you'll be able to see this full admin bar at the top, and you'll be able to see all of these options. For those of you who are not system admins, it's good to know for you, still good to know for you to know that these options exist, so you can ask your system administrator to make some of these changes if necessary. So the first thing we're going to do is actually add a new custom timeline event. And we can do that just by clicking on the timeline events option here under the admin bar. And we can see here some of our previously added timeline events. So we had obviously the COVID-19 responses, we had whether or not they joined a club, and whether or not someone submitted a website inquiry. A lot of organizations we work with attendees or participants who have gone through the criminal justice system in some way. And one of the outcomes that they want to report against is whether or not those participants that have then engaged in their services have gone on to reoffend. So as an example today, I'm going to use add a new timeline event to our drop-down list, has attendee reoffended. And as I mentioned, there's kind of different options that we can select and how this information is recorded. So we could just add a text box here, or it could be a number, a count. So if you're counting, for instance, with the BMI measurement, you would put a number here in that box that appears. It could be a single trials drop down, like for the accreditations, where you say, okay, what particular subheader of that event has this person achieved? Or it could just be a yes or no field. So in this case, I'm just going to put a yes or no field. Has this person reoffended? Yes or no, and click add. And that's it. So I can always go back in and manage that, that field through this page here. So through that timeline events field, I can always go back and change any of those settings. As you can see, it's shown here. So now if I go back into Anna's profile and check out her timeline, that new field that we've created will appear. So here we go, has attendee reoffended? Oh, sorry. Just going to make sure everyone else is muted here. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, so that new timeline event now appears on our drop-down menu and we can use it. If there are any timeline events that you're actually no longer using, you can also just choose to turn them on or off on this display menu. So the way we do that is to again to go into our admin fields and then click on data display options. And then when I scroll down, you can see these are all the fields that sit in our registration form. So when you first add a participant, or when you make changes on their personal details on their profile, this is where you can actually toggle those fields on or off, whether they are displayed and even whether they are required to complete or not. But I will also be shown my timeline events, and here you will first shown your custom fields. And again, here's the one we've just added, and currently it's displayed. So currently this is showing on our drop-down menu. But for instance, once the COVID-19 pandemic is over, we may no longer need these fields that we have created. So at that time, we may then choose to not display them on our menu anymore. And I can just scroll down, save those changes. And again, when I go back onto someone's profile and check out our menu, you can see those fields have now disappeared from that drop-down. That doesn't mean you can no longer report on them. You'll still be able to include them in your different reports. It's just that your users and different colleagues won't have to see them and won't accidentally select them when adding a new timeline event from then on. Okay, so that's how you add and manage your timeline events. One thing that is important again to note with the restricted attendee timeline events, it's maybe necessary as a system administrator to have a bit of oversight over that, to make sure people haven't accidentally restricted access to certain timeline events that actually other colleagues need to see. And just to have oversight over how many different timeline events have been restricted and so on. So what we've allowed system administrators to do is to manage that from a particular user's account profile. So they can access that through the admin tab. And if you just click on show all users, you will see the different people in the organization who currently hold logins under the active accounts. And if I go into our friend Sarah here, for instance, and click update, I have these two options on the right. I can view what timeline events she currently has access to. And you can see this one here. I personally, my user doesn't have access to, so again, I can't read those notes, but I can manage whether Sarah should still have access to that. So it may be that actually someone made a mistake here. It's not appropriate for her to see that particular comment, and then I can remove access on her behalf. And similarly, I can click on manage user access to restricted timeline events to, across multiple events, across multiple users, manage the access to a particular event type. So if it turns out that actually Sarah doesn't work on an education and employment project and therefore should not have access to EET status changes, I can choose to wholesale remove all access from all types of all those events that she currently has access to in one go. So I can just click remove access here, and that means all EET status changes that she's previously had restricted access to are now removed, and when she goes into that person's profile, she won't be able to read the full details of that anymore. Okay, so the last element I want to cover is how we now are able to report on our timeline events. So once we've added them onto different people's profiles, how can we get hold of all that information? How can we use that to report back to our funders, to get an oversight internally for our annual reports and so on? There's a few different options. So the first one I'm going to look at is the newest one that we've recently added, which is a dedicated timeline events report on our reporting menu. And that sits at the very bottom here, timeline events. And what this brings up is a page that lists the total number of timeline events that have been recorded across all of our participants, and then the number of unique attendees that hold timeline events. So obviously one attendee may hold multiple events on their profile, which is why that number is higher. So there's different reporting options here. So first I can just scroll down, see all of our custom events, followed by our globally available Upshot event types like accommodation status, accreditations, and so on. And if I click on this open plus menu here, so for any drop-down menus or yes/no options, I can then see the breakdown against our different values. So for instance, here I can see how many people have received groceries or prescriptions through our COVID-19 delivery, or here against our EET status, how many have now gained employment or are now in education and so on. So for reporting, this gives you those numbers really quickly. And I can use our different filtering options here on the right to drill that down. So of course, we added particular fields against our education and employment project. So I want to see what our individual milestones have been achieved through that particular program. And then if I click filter, it will break those down for me. So we're particularly interested here in our referrals, our education, employment, and training status changes, and our accreditations. And again, I can then open that up. Okay. The next reporting option, so once we actually have these numbers, we may be interested in, okay, well, who are these people? So for instance, who are these 14 people who have gained accreditations in our education and employment program? And the way to find that out is, of course, through our people report. So the people report is accessible through the people tab here, or the reports tab at the top. And if I open that up, I'm just going to click reset to make sure I don't have any other filters on. We can, most of you hopefully are familiar with these different filters, but what you can do is select multiple filters that apply to our search criteria. So I could say, for instance, show me all those timeline events, all those accreditations, gained by people under the age of 30, for instance, if that's one of our reporting criteria, or by everyone living in a certain postcode area or particular ward, for instance. What we want to see is how many accreditations have been gained in our education and employment project. So you can select that here, or you can actually select that on the timeline events itself. So I can say here, right, timeline events, show me everyone who has any accreditation. I can even drill down onto a particular accreditation if I want to. And then we want to see the ones that are linked to one of our particular projects, which is the education and employment project here. And then click go. And what that does, it tells us how many of those people are. So we already know it was 14 from our timeline events report. But now we actually have the names of those individuals, and I can download that information, including some of their other demographic and personal data, into an Excel spreadsheet. And that includes all the details of those that we have recorded on the timeline event itself. So with accreditations, for instance, if you wanted to then break down an Excel, expiry dates of accreditations coming up, you could do that within that Excel spreadsheet. Okay. You can also report on some timeline events through our measured indicator. Oh, sorry, before I move on from here, just one thing to note that's really important. Through the people report, obviously it tells you the names of the individuals who hold a certain timeline event. And what it's important here is whether or not those timeline events are actually restricted, whether you have access to those or not. So the people report will only show you those names and the number of people who you have access to. So if actually some of those accreditations in the education employment program were restricted, and I'm not one of the people who has access to that, when I do my people report, I will only be shown the number and the names of the people who I have access to. So on the people report here, there may actually be more people who have that accreditation, but I don't have access to them, so I won't be shown them. So that's why if you want the full number, do run the timeline events report to get the anonymized number of those accreditations, for instance. Okay, so another reporting tool here is the measured indicators that we can use to identify the number of accreditations that have been gained or the number of referrals. So currently it only works for those two timeline event options. So if I go into my education employment project and then click by time on our indicators, we can see our measured indicators, these targets that we've set up across a different measurement period. And you can see the two examples that I've mentioned. So I'm counting here the number of qualifications gained within this project area. So they have to be linked to this project when we denote that timeline event on someone's profile. I can see our target here for our project for this year, for our project timeline was 20. And already 13 individuals have gained qualifications in this project. So if I look at our visual test tube here, we can see that we're absolutely smashing this target. This is how far through that measurement period we are, about a quarter of the way through the year, and already we've hit 65% out of the target. But we're also counting the number of referrals from local council services into our education employment program. And so far, only 2 this year have been referred, but our target was to achieve 10 this year. So we're falling slightly behind, but obviously we're still on track. We could still hit that target by the end of the year. So if you're unsure about measured indicators, do check out our guides or do get in touch with us and we can help you set those up as well. Now the final reporting tool, I do appreciate it's already 11 o'clock, so I really apologize for running over here. As you can see, there's a lot of content to cover, but hopefully you can stay on for just a couple more minutes as I go through this last reporting tool that you can use, which is fantastic for timeline events, which is our written reports. And what this actually allows you to do is download information about a whole project into Word, or what we're interested in, information about a particular attendee. So if I, again, look up our friend Anna, I can put a time restraint on here. So I could say, just show me all the information that we've collected over the last 3 months, for instance. I'm just going to show our full history of Anna. I'm going to generate that report. What it does, it downloads all the information from her profile and her attendance and her timeline into a Word document. So this is fantastic if you're about to go into a one-to-one meeting with Anna, if you're going to create a case study on Anna, and you'll then want to be able to send someone all the information you've captured. So here we go, this is what it looks like. So we've got that information from their profile. We can include any media files that we've associated with that person. So I could just download that image and include it in our Word document here. We can see all the events and activities that she's attended, but also all those timeline events and notes we've made, any milestones that she's achieved. Okay, so this is a fantastic, really quick way of downloading that information as well. Okay, deep breath. That was a lot covered there. Thank you so much for bearing with us. As I said, all of this information is covered in our support guide, so do check them out just here on the help section. Or as Lynn said, get in touch if you want help with setting any of this up on your account as well. So back to Lynn. I don't know if you've had any questions through that you would like me to answer while we're still on the call.
That's brilliant, Jason. Really comprehensive coverage there of everything to do with timelines. We had a couple of questions in, but I think you've answered them already. One around the restricted access and what you see in reports. So that was covered in the people report. So yes, just bear in mind that as a user, when you run that report, what you have access to will be affected by that. So yes, and I think everybody was transfixed. So I think you've covered just about every angle of timeline events. But as Jason says, if you do want to get in touch, if you need more information, or if you need help, you know, just getting started with timeline events, please do contact us at support at Upshot. We will send a quick survey around to everyone just to get your feedback and perhaps suggest some other subjects to cover in the future as well. So look out for that. That will be coming with you to you today. And the next webinar we'll be having is in 2 weeks' time, same time, 10:30 on Thursday, the 21st of May. We'll be looking at improved attendee privacy. So we looked at timeline restricted access today, but there are other ways in which you can improve attendee privacy, and there's some important developments that have happened recently on that as well. So thank you, Jason. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and stay safe. And once again, also thank you for the great work that you're doing in your communities during this time. It's really great to hear from all our different types of organisations. And yeah, we look forward to speaking with you and maybe even seeing you sometime very soon. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.